Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. So before we get started, don't forget to go and get yourself that perfect drink that you enjoy drinking, or a lovely warm cup of cocoa, because I've got a phenomenal story for you tonight that you're really going to love. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with tonight's story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my name is Robert, and I have an extraordinary story to share with you and your listeners about a mule deer hunt that happened to me here in Idaho about 10 long years ago, when I was hunting with my brother Joey. I grew up in the north end of Boise in Idaho, in a really pretty green leafy neighbourhood, which is an older area well renowned for its eclectic mix of homes, from charming bungalows to older houses that have been remodelled and restored. Our house is located in close proximity to Julia Davis Park, and if you're a rose enthusiast like I am, this park will quite literally blow you away, or knock your socks off, so to speak, because it is full of the most elegant, exquisite roses, with delicate full blooms and contrasting colourful shades. This delightful enclosure is scattered with trees and walkways of pristine manicured green grass, while alive with colourful butterflies and buzzing bees that hover from one flower to the next. Julia Davis Park is situated close to downtown Boise, along the Boise River, and spans about 90 acres. So if you're visiting Boise and love roses, this is a must-see spot for you. There are thousands of acres here in Boise, used solely for recreational purposes, with the foothills that provide hundreds of miles of trails, mountain biking and hiking terrain that provide sumptuous views over emerald green grassy hills and resplendent-looking prairies. On both sides of the Boise River, you will observe the green belt that extends for 30 miles, which is a firm favourite for Idahoans and wildlife alike. I grew up in a cottage-style home with my mother and dad and my brother Joey, which featured a grey slate roof, whitewashed walls, large French windows throughout, and a very broad covered front porch that overlooked the most sublime yard, because my father so happened to be a professional, proficient and skilled landscape gardener, sought after by some of Idaho's finest venues to design and landscape their yards, terraces, herbaceous borders and kitchen gardens. Our yard embodies my father's extraordinary eye for detail, which includes flower beds bursting with foxgloves, petunias, zinnia, daisies, coneflowers, lavender and salvia, hemmed in by pristine manicured hedges. Then there's a circular rose garden full of varying shades of pink roses, along with an exquisite orchard filled with apple, cherry and peach trees, creating the quintessential English country garden effect. Growing up in this part of the world is every kid's dream, because without a doubt we were blessed with an exciting outdoor lifestyle, and from a very young age my brother and I were skilled in fishing, hunting, camping, hiking, mountain biking and whitewater rafting, and we loved it all. We also enjoyed rollerblading and skateboarding down our quiet neighbourhood road, as well as taking our two greyhounds, Acorn and Briar, for their daily walks in the foothills of Boise, which is an excursion that they always loved. My strange, curious story begins when my brother and I went to stay at a friend's tiny log cabin that was often let out to hunting enthusiasts for the weekend. It was a very spacious mountain retreat, which was an idyllic, splendiferous havens for all kind of indigenous wildlife, such as elk, mule deer, turkey and pronghorn. This glorious sweep of land stretched over a very vast distance, encompassing mountains, ridges and areas of densely pocketed pine trees that were also scattered liberally through the valley, along with two vigorously flowing creeks, which only added to the aesthetic appeal of this quintessential, charming, earthly paradise. I was so excited about spending some quality time with my brother Joey, as we had a very good relationship and we seemed to work well together as a hunting team, understanding each other's signals in moments when talking is not an option. My brother is a very gentle, quiet, reserved, self-contained sort of person that is exceedingly stable, grounded, long-suffering and very patient, while I'm a very easygoing kind of dude with an extrovert personality and sometimes a little over-rambunctious, headstrong, opinionated, impulsive and excitable. If we were both dog breeds, my brother would be a gentle whippet and I would be an overexcitable Jack Russell Terrier. We arrived at the cabin early in the morning and unloaded all our stuff in the cosy little intimate cabin that was made out of very old timber beams and was fitted with seamless glass windows that made the most of the panoramic exquisite views, and some of the floor-to-ceiling glass doors that opened out onto the large wooden deck overlooked the gurgling creek. The cabin was open plan, living literally at its finest, as the luxury state-of-art kitchen flowed seamlessly into the living, dining and bedroom areas without any need for partitions, and was sumptuously decorated with comfortable couches, a couple of large beds, coffee tables lined with lots of interesting books, all about hunting, and a black deer and elk mount were also pinned up against the wooden walls, including some paintings of colourful hunting scenes from the turn of the century. Let's not forget, of course, the prerequisite for every hunter's cabin, taking central stage, was the stunning stone fireplace. My brother and I unpacked the food items we had brought with us and we placed them in the refrigerator along with lots and lots of beers, so imperative for all our hunting excursions, and lots of food to keep our human engines burning on full throttle. Then, armed with some flasks of warm coffee, we sought out the fresh air outside the cabin, with the purposes of glassing or overviewing, if you like, to get a general perspective and feel for the layout of the land. We found a high mountainous elevation that overlooked rocky ridges, ravines, open prairies and shaded retreats, and we began to survey the environment with our binoculars. Before long, we began to substantiate the best areas to locate the mule deer of considerable size, with sizable racks, of course. We were pleased to see a couple of good specimens grazing in the lower valley, flanked by a shaded area of ubiquitous pine trees, which made these deer rather inconspicuous and well hidden from the naked eye. The location was easily accessible by foot, luckily, and hopefully if the mule deer did not deviate too far from their current emplacement, it might not be too challenging to take down a hefty buck there, while maintaining that crucial element of surprise and invisibility, something that requires lots of practice and self-restraint. We needed to procure the weapon of stealth to maximise our opportunity for success. Sometimes hunting requires days of glassing and exceeding patience, because the last thing you want to do is to alert the animal to your presence. A skittish deer is so much tougher to hunt, as they're predisposed to being guarded and attentive to the slightest sign of any movement, ever wary of a potential predator on the hunt. My brother and I returned to the cabin, feeling very optimistic and positive about our early morning scouting and prospecting. We had established an excellent location where the mule deer seemed inconspicuous, camouflaged and exceedingly well hidden. Our projection for our early morning hunt seemed exceedingly promising, and I was beginning to feel the familiar fluttering of thrilled excitement in eager anticipation for this hunt. We prepared some generous-sized rump steaks on the stone fire pit outside the cabin, which we served with some salad and some creamy garlic and parmesan tagliatelle, which was washed down well with a couple of beers. I was in an incredibly good mood as I drank my beer and flicked through the pages of an awe-inspiring hunting book, while Joey was placing the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle together. It was utterly magnificent, with the croaking of frogs and the singing crickets serenading the dusky night with their joyful chorus, and the darkened firmament sparkled with pretty scattering of twinkling stars that looked like silvery jewels that served only to accentuate the magnificence of the pearly, glistening white moon. We could also hear strange calls across the valley, and owl hoots that sounded felicious, almost as if someone was trying to replicate the sound of an owl, but failing abysmally in their bungled attempts. "That's not an owl," said Joey, looking at me with a perplexed expression on his face. "What the heck is that?" Soon after the owl hoot subsided, we began to hear whooping sounds across the valley, followed by sounds of wood knocks that sounded rather like someone was throttling a tree limb with the back of a spade. I'm afraid to say that we could not discern nor establish as to the origins of these mysterious sounds. Before long, our ever-increasing yawns signalled the need for us to return to our cosy beds that were layered in the softest downy duvets. We both set our alarm clocks for an early morning dawn wake-up call. I must confess, when I awoke to my alarm buzzing, I did not want to manoeuvre my sleeping body out of my comfortable cosy bed. I was enjoying the sleep so much, and really did not fancy rising early after all. I considered persuading Joey to postpone our hunt to early evening that day. My plans were massacred by my discerning brother, who knew only too well my tendency to procrastinate, and he yanked me out of bed with a squirt of ice-cold water on my face, with much kicking, screaming and protesting on my part. Before long, attired in our camouflage gear and ammo harnesses, we were rambling down the hilly ravines at the crack of dawn, our heavy boots crunching the grass under our feet. We were armed with rifles and flasks of coffee, bottles of water and sandwiches that were placed in a loose-fitting bag that I slung over my shoulder. The early, crisp, fresh morning air, with a gentle, invigorating breeze, blew against my face, and I could see the orange tangerine shadow of the rounded sun blushing across the horizon. We could hear the sounds of pretty bird song resonating across the valley in cheerful warbles and tweets, serenading the arrival of a brand new day. My brother and I sat on the opposite ridge to the shaded retreat from the valley below, where we planned to hide ourselves and surreptitiously stalk the deer. We hungrily began to eat our sandwiches and swill down our coffees. We watched the sun slowly beginning to rise in the most marvellous folds of resplendent oranges, yellows, golds and pinks, and were momentarily mesmerised by its astonishing beauty. Things moved quickly for us, because after our breakfast it would seem that in a twinkling of an eye my brother and I were now waiting for the mule deer in the lower shaded valley, and we hankered down low, taking cover behind some rambling foliage, making ever sure that we were not observed or noticed. As I had forecast, the large mule deer were frolicking around the shady retreat, but both of them were too far for us to shoot. We waited ever patiently for them to cross our paths, almost certain that luck was on our side this morning. Suddenly the most extraordinary thing happened, and it would seem that the mule deer were getting ever so edgy, as if they sensed something dangerously threatening was venturing closer towards them. It would seem that whatever they were afraid of was behind them and not in our location. I could hardly believe it, as a scene of madness unfolded before our very eyes, as the two terrified mule deer began to scamper towards where we were hiding. I immediately took aim at one of the hefty, sizable mule deer. It stopped for a second and looked back over its shoulders anxiously. In that second, as my heart was fluttering with excitement, I hit the brain with perfect precision with my .260 Magnum, and he was out like a light. In that moment I felt the most incredible surge of thrilling adrenaline coursing through my veins from the sheer exhilaration of the hunt. I could feel the sweat pouring down my face from the heightened intensity of this marvellous experience. I truly felt on top of the world. There isn't a feeling like it. My proud brother gave me the high five, and I moved forward to retrieve my trophy, seizing the deer by its antlers and dragging it towards where my brother was standing. Imagine my amazement when I turned around to find my brother had gone missing and had seemingly vanished into thin air. Where on earth was he? I noticed his rifle lying flat on the ground, and I knew something was intrinsically wrong. Joey would never abandon his rifle like this, not even for a call of nature. It wasn't like my brother to vanish like this either. Where was he, I wondered in horror. A terrible feeling of impending dread literally surfed through my mind like a tempestuous sea with perilous waves, giving me a sense of a terrible outcome. Perhaps my brother had been carried off by a mountain lion, I thought in horror. But if that were indeed the case, why did he not scream out for my help? I called my brother with desperate cries that echoed back to me, but I was met with only silence. Joey! Joey! Joey, where are you? Joey, please tell me. Don't play games with me, Joey. Where are you? Where are you, Joey? Joey, please, Joey! I looked everywhere, calling his name, but there was no response, and I felt sick to my stomach as a deep guttural nausea rose up in the back of my throat, and I began to vomit violently and throw up the contents of my stomach for what seemed like an age, until my stomach was aching because it was empty. This is my brother's side of our remarkable story. I was smiling as I watched my brother Rob take down that large mule deer with such impressive antlers, and it was a very sizable animal. He took it down with one perfect shot to the brain, and I was thrilled and enthused by his masterful performance. I watched him running towards the deer eagerly. Then quite suddenly I found myself being lifted off the ground to about 8 feet in the air and thrown over the shoulders of this massive beast, rather like a sack of potatoes, with his huge hands holding my arms over one end of his shoulders and my legs at the other end. It was so surreal and so utterly terrifying at the same time that I became too tongue-tied to actually scream. And even though I tried to call out, nothing came out. I just kept thinking, what the heck is happening to me? I looked down at the critter that was carrying me and noticed that whatever it was colossal, and every part of this creature's body was solidly built, with dense muscles that were powerfully strong. I knew the critter was definitely not a bear, because I could see it possessed hands and stood up like a man, covered in silver-grey, long flowing hair that was matted, tangled, and really rather sweaty. The critter moved hurriedly on powerful long legs with a smooth grace over the mountainous terrain, which was less bumpy than a horseback ride would have been. Henceforth my 220-kilogram body was like a feather to this creature. I felt like a rag doll being suspended over these gargantuan-sized shoulders. I could hear the critter breathing, and he sounded so much like a horse. I tried to wiggle and even push away at the creature's hands, but his hands held me down with such a firmness. He was so strong that pushing against his hands was like pushing it against a concrete slab, and attempting to escape was absolutely futile. I was beginning to believe that this critter was going to eat me. I did wonder why he hadn't killed me already, though, as surely a dead body is easier to carry than a body that is trying to fight back with all its might. My heart was pounding violently in my chest as the adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I knew that my life was almost certainly over, or about to be. I began to pray for a miracle, that I would be able to escape this monstrous, terrifying beast. I think the critter carried me for 2 long hours, and I could feel him climbing this high rocky ridge, much like a mountain goat, with effortless ease. Finally he transported me into this open cave that was on a sheer drop. He placed me on the ground there, and that was when reality hit me hard like a thunderbolt. I was in a cave surrounded by Bigfoots, which for me was impossible to fathom, because Bigfoot was a mythical creature surely, but not any more, not as far as I was concerned. I noticed there was one female Bigfoot who was also silver-grey in colour and had firm breasts covered with hair, and then there were 2 little Bigfoots standing by her side. One was a 2-foot-tall female, and the other was a 4-foot male. Their bodies were covered in this beautiful silvery grey hair, and they possessed cone-shaped heads, angular faces, prominent brow ridges, flat noses, narrow lips, and deep-set eyes of a yellow-brown colour. I would describe them as humanoid apes in appearance, with overlong arms, big shoulders, and long, powerful legs. I would say the male Bigfoot that had abducted me was easily over 1,000 pounds and 10 foot tall, while the female was approximately about 7 foot tall and 500 pounds at a guess. The female Bigfoot began to chatter away to the male, and I could sense that she was very bewildered, flummoxed, and perturbed to see me standing there in the cave. I know she wasn't comfortable with my presence there, and seemed more than a little peeved off with the male for bringing me into their cosy den, which was lined with nesting materials and deerskins. The male Bigfoot kept chattering away and pointing to the little Bigfoots, and then back to me. The female finally pushed her children towards me so that they could take a very long, hard look at me. I realised in that moment that I was like a biology lesson for the 2 little Bigfoots, and the father was showing them what a human looked like. Why he would give them a practical lesson on the human species, I honestly don't know, nor do I have an answer to that question. I can only ascertain that Bigfoots are as curious about us as we are about them. The little Bigfoot was actually incredibly cute, comical, and quite fluffy. The hair was not smooth and flowing like the parents', but much more downy, like a chicken's. They both looked at me with a curious interest, studying and touching my white smooth skin, and my hands with a fascination and intrigue. They also examined my fingers one by one, and my skin with awe. I think they were amazed that I was hairless. The male indicated for me to take off my boots, and to show the little Bigfoots my feet. And when they touched my soles, they made a delighted, high-pitched whooping sound, as if to say, "Wow, so soft! How can he walk on those?" They seemed to find my small, hairless, soft feet a subject of great interest, fascination, and intrigue, as well as my big leather boots, which they examined ever so carefully. The little female Bigfoot tried to put my boots on her feet, but her broad feet could not fit into them, and she looked bitterly disappointed and very peeved off. I noticed their feet were much more padded than ours, and the toes splayed at an angle. The only way I can describe it to you is that I felt like a laboratory rat being studied by a class of scientists as the little critters began to feel my hair with their hands and even played with it. Once again they made high-pitched whooping sounds and then continued to chatter in an animated high-pitched language that sounded like gibberish, but I have to tell you there were words that could almost have been English in their enunciation, and I'm not joking either. These critters, when they talk, are highly expressive and will often instinctively mimic what they're actually talking about, which makes them easy to understand and fine actors, to say the least. I really think people underestimate how incredibly intelligent, bright and discerning Bigfoots actually are. I began to relax immediately when I suddenly knew that the creatures meant me absolutely no harm. Even the little 4-foot Bigfoot was actually offering me berries and leaves to eat in a gesture of friendship, and was so kind, congenial and sweet towards me. I decided to cooperate with their biology lesson, so I stripped naked for the critters, doing a couple of twirls for them like a model so that they could see me in all my glory. I think they appreciated all my efforts and examined not only my naked body, but all my clothes in deep fascination. After a while I replaced my clothes and boots and pointed towards the cave and said, "Please can I go now? I'd really like to go now." The male Bigfoot seemed to understand me, and he threw me over his shoulder again and carried me out of the cave, and I heard the other 3 Bigfoots making whooping sounds. I think they were saying goodbye to me. Whoop! Whoop! So that was my brother's account for you. As you can imagine, by now I was ignorant as to what had happened to him, and besides myself with worry and fear. Once I'd thrown up, which was a long time, I began to search the whole area for my brother, because finding him alive was crucial, and time was of the essence. I couldn't afford to waste a minute. I was in such an emotional frenzy and could not think straight for a very long time. It was as if I was walking in a hazy blur or in a fog. I began walking all over the valley, calling out my brother's name, and then I began to pray to God, making all kinds of promises to him, if only he would return my brother safely. Tears were pouring down my face, as I was certain my brother was almost certainly dead, but I still continued to search for him. It must have been about 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I suddenly saw the strange creature racing down the rocky embankment towards the lower valley, where we had actually shot the deer. I realised immediately that I was observing the mythical creature, otherwise known as Bigfoot. I reached for my rifle to shoot at the critter because it was carrying my brother on the back of his shoulders, and surely my brother needed to be rescued. But my brother screamed, "Don't shoot! He's a friend! He means us no harm!" The Bigfoot popped my brother on the ground, and I ran towards my brother, embracing him in my arms with loud sobs of relief. "I thought you were dead," I cried. "I thought I'd lost you forever." "Look," said my brother, "there goes your trophy." We saw the Bigfoot gliding towards the mule deer that was lying on the ground and throwing it over his shoulders. He looked at us with his golden eyes, let out a loud whoop as if to say goodbye, and then just glided away. "A friend," I said to my brother with a raised eyebrow. "You're calling your abductor a friend? I've heard everything now." Well, he was actually very benevolent and meant me absolutely no harm. I was just a biology class for a couple of little Bigfoots on human anatomy, and I even stripped down for them in all my glory. "You are joking," I said. "No, I'm not," said my brother, laughing. "Actually, it was an experience I shall not forget in a hurry." In the weeks and years that followed, my brother and I have never shared our story with anyone, as remaining anonymous is our fervent wish. But I thought I would share my story with you and your listeners because I wanted you to all know that Bigfoots are not all bloodthirsty predators as many believe, but intelligent humanoids that are so like us in many ways, which is what my brother discerned from his experience. My brother emphatically believes he will never ever forget those cute little fluffy Bigfoot because they were utterly adorable, and he has absolutely no regrets about the abduction because he said the extraordinary encounter literally opened his eyes to the mysteries of life, one of them that he became privy to himself. He is now affirmed in his strong belief that there is so much more to our reality than we can ever comprehend. So there you are. That's my story. What an incredible story. Thank you so very much for sharing that with us. I cannot believe it. It is phenomenal. And it really does show you that Bigfoots are very interested in humans, just as we are in them. Until next time, goodbye and good night.